They didn't even have to use a microscope in the Americans' coronary arteries. And of course, this is not something that just happens the moment of the heart attack. It has been happening for decades. This is actual real-time data for Denmark. But a lot of people think, oh wow, that's so cool. But you know, it's actually really not hard to put this data together because I did it for US, Canada, all these different countries. And you know what I do? I just shuffle these top 10 around. They're not really a whole lot different in terms of different industrialized or first world nations. Of course, heart disease is number one, but the good news for Denmark is that this, in the last 20 years, has gone down 51%. It used to cause 23% of your deaths in your country. So that's like almost a quarter, right? That's crazy. But now it's down to about 11 or 12%. The problem is what has started to replace the heart disease. I don't know if you noticed, there's something up here 3 times, right? Cancer, cancer, cancer. Those have all gone up for Denmark, but that's not any surprise. Other industrialized nations have had the same phenomena. This is not on the list for you guys, but Alzheimer's has gone up 140% for Denmark. So huge rise. That's the greatest rise of any disease entity. Alzheimer's, it didn't make the top 10. It was like number 13, but it went from like number 38 to like number 13. So it really took a tremendous jump. LRTI, that's just lower respiratory tract infections, things like pneumonia. I bet you know what cirrhosis is probably from, right, in your country. No mystery there. But in case there's any questions, this is the data of the top 10 causes of disease for Denmark. I was actually surprised at number 1, still smoking. Do a lot of you guys still smoke? I was surprised. But that was what the biggest cause of disease. Second was dietary risks, high blood pressure, overweight, people that are physically inactive. Number 6 was alcohol. That was actually pretty high. For most of the industrialized nations. That was higher than even Canada. That was higher than the US. Do a lot of Danish people drink? That's pretty common. Okay. So diabetes was up there, high cholesterol, occupational hazards. I don't know if there's a lot of race car drivers in Denmark, or maybe it's carpenters or someone trying to fix the windmill or something like that. I don't know, but you have occupational hazards up there. And lastly, this isn't just pollution, but it's ambient evening pollution. That was a specific type of pollution in your country. Now, if you look at these causes of death and disease, how many of them are lifestyle related? What do you think? I'd say probably almost all of them, wouldn't you? How many of them could you change? How many of these could you change? What do you think? Probably all of them. I mean, you probably could change occupations, couldn't you? I don't know. Could you change pollution? Maybe you could move to the country. I don't know. Get your own windmill to blow it away. I don't know. But the rest of them, for sure, right? These are all lifestyle related, and they definitely can be improved, if not reversed. The good news about heart disease, as I mentioned, not only for your country, but all industrialized nations, it is decreasing, but cancer is on the rise. And I think we discussed this a little bit yesterday. How many people know what cholesterol is? What does it refer to? Do you even understand what I'm saying? Raise your hand. Cholesterol, everybody raise their hand. Saturated fat, raise your hand. LDL, HDL. What's systolic and diastolic? Do you know what I'm talking about? Everyone know that? How about a CEA-125 antigen? Do you know what that is? Come on, some of you know who that is. Anyway, that's just a cancer marker. That's a tumor marker. So basically, we have had a lot of education about heart disease. People know about heart disease. And do you remember how to get to the front of the line in the emergency room? What do you complain of? Oh, I'm having chest pain. And then everyone whisks you back. We do EKG lab tests, and I say, oh, okay, where's the chest pain? Well, it's kind of here, but it's gone now. But can you look at the little lump I have on my, over here? Can you look at that? That does happen, but That's what people do. And we talked about margarine, right? Margarine was to replace saturated fat, which is butter, right? And saturated fat is one of the biggest determinants of heart disease risk, right? We'll talk about that in just a moment. The reason why heart disease is very serious is it's often hard to diagnose. Most people, when they think of a heart attack, they think of what? Chest pain, right? Did you know that up to 15% of people don't have any chest pain? That's kind of scary, isn't it? In fact, when you look at the foundational studies for heart disease, they're called the Framingham studies. You don't need to know that. Probably you guys need to know that. But those are the foundational studies on heart disease, on chest pain. Most of those studies were done on white males, white men. So a white man may feel crushing substernal chest pain going to the jaw and down the left arm with nausea, shortness of breath, and diaphoresis, but not a woman, not the elderly, definitely not someone with diabetes. Because as we learned earlier this week, diabetes damages the nerves, right? But most people don't realize that it not only damages the nerves in your extremities, it damages the nerves to your heart. So you may not perceive chest pain. I've had diabetics come in and they say, you know what, I feel really nauseous, full-blown heart attack. I had someone just say, I'm weak, full-blown heart attack. And you have to be very, very cautious that you don't miss things. In fact, when you look at people who come in, when they say, I have indigestion, I automatically think heart attack. I don't even think of indigestion because that's not going to kill you, right? Some people say, oh, it's just heartburn. I ate some, maybe some bad fish or something like that, and it just kind of hurts right here. I've seen people with back pain have full-blown heart attacks. In fact, they said it's their back pain and it's their chronic back pain. They've always had the same back pain, and it ends up being a heart attack. It's hard. It's hard. Sometimes people say, well, I took an antacid or a Tums, and then it went away. Or, I pushed on it and it got worse. Did you know 4% of heart attacks, if you push on it, it gets worse? So it's scary. It's very, very scary. So you can't necessarily rule out a heart attack just by the history alone, or even physical exam. You have to be very careful. In fact, when you look at even testing, have any of you ever had a stress test or know of anyone had a stress test? Raise your hand. Right? That's no fun, right? You run on the treadmill, right? And then they do all this stuff to you. Did you know that the stress test is up to 35% inaccurate? Oh, yeah. Even the things that are supposed to be more accurate, like stress echo, thallium. In fact, when you have a cath, when they put a camera through your groin and actually look into your coronary arteries, did you know that that can miss significant heart disease? Because the cath does not identify which cholesterol plaques are stable or unstable. So when you just look at it, you may say, maybe 20% stenosis, he's still got a lot of room there, but that may be an unstable plaque. So they're starting to do things like coronary CT, right? They're starting to do coronary ultrasound. They're starting to do different types of imaging to see what that plaque is made of. And if that plaque is unstable, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're safe. So what about like blood tests? I want to talk a little bit again about cholesterol. You guys do millimoles, right, per deciliter? Is that your units for cholesterol? Do you do milligrams per deciliter or millimoles per deciliter? Is cholesterol like 5? Is that a cholesterol number for you? Yeah. So if you think about what high cholesterol is, traditionally it's 5.2 or greater. But what's bad about that is how we come up with normal is we take an asymptomatic population and we go 2 standard deviations out from that number. That's how we come up with normal lab values. And I think really that's voodoo, honestly. And I'm a physician, I'm a scientist. I've done 2 graduate degrees. So I think that's really not a good idea. And the reason why I say that is because if you have a normal cholesterol, then you will die the normal death, which is heart disease, right? So, I mean, you don't want to do that. Like we mentioned yesterday, who wants to be average? Nobody wants to come home and say, I got a C, Mom. You know, that doesn't make any sense, right? You want to not be normal. You want to be optimal, right? And as we mentioned yesterday, if you look at the Framingham studies, nobody with a cholesterol less than 3.6 ever had a heart attack during the entire studies, like decades of studies. Wouldn't you rather never have a heart attack? Yeah, that's what I want. What's very interesting when you look at different populations like US, Scandinavia, Denmark, whatnot, Japan seems to do very well as far as heart disease, even though they all smoke. Like the majority of their men, like 60% of them smoke versus 28% in other industrialized nations. And smoking is like one of the number 1 risk factors for heart disease, right? Anyone name the other 3? Obesity, that's coming, but it's not quite part of the big 4 yet. What else? Yes, high blood pressure, yes. What else? Smoking, high blood pressure. We talked about it the first night. Diabetes, that's right. And then high cholesterol, right? Those are the big 4. And even though the Japanese smoke a lot, in fact, did you know that the last airlines to give up smoking on the airplane was like all the flights from Japan and to Japan? It's very interesting because they just all smoke. But they have a very, very different risk profile in terms of their diet, in terms of their exercise, in terms of their cholesterol levels. So if you quit smoking, you cut your risk by over half, 50 to 70% reduction just for quitting smoking. And they find that after just 10 years of being quit, your risk drops to like the lowest it's ever going to be. So if you quit smoking, today is the best day to quit. Encourage your friends to do it too. In fact, if you lower your blood pressure per number, if you look at the diastolic number, the top number is the systolic, the bottom number is the diastolic. Every number you go down in the diastolic, you reduce your risk by 2 to 3%. So if you lower the diastolic by 20, that would be like a huge risk reduction, right? That'd be like 40 to 60% risk reduction. You lower your risk by a factor of 10 by reversing your diabetes. And we talked about how to reverse diabetes the first night. Diabetes is not the sugar that's the issue, it's what? The fat, right? The fat in the diet and the fat on you. That's what you need to take care of for diabetes. Also, you can reduce your risk of heart disease by 45% by starting a regular exercise program. And that's actually part of the big 5. You know, the big 4 is smoking, diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, but the big 5, the next one that's going to be added is a sedentary lifestyle. So if you're sedentary, you don't exercise, that's going to be the next big risk factor. Obesity is coming up as number 6. Think about subtracting one of those risk factors. Like let's say you do have high cholesterol. You know, I remember drawing some serum from a patient who actually had not heart disease, but he had pancreatitis. And when we drew the blood, it formed a layer of cream on the top. Have you ever seen that? It separated out just as it sat, and just cream came to the top. I don't know if you've ever had like Jell-O or a dessert, but there was a dessert called Jell-O 1, 2, 3, and there was like 3 layers, and that's what his blood did. It was just like pure fat, and there was another layer. It was really nasty. And we went to run his triglycerides and cholesterol, and they were unobtainable. They were off the chart. And so he had pancreatitis because his triglycerides were very, very high. But it was also his cholesterol. It was like crazy. His cholesterol was like 20, like 15. It was nuts. And so even if you have maybe some risk factors, you can actually reverse one risk factor, because not all cholesterol is bad, right? HDL, what's that? The good cholesterol, right? So if you have a good cholesterol of 1.6 or greater, then it's actually protective. So in other words, if your good cholesterol is over 60, you can subtract one risk factor, right? But a lot of people will ask, well, how do you raise your good cholesterol? Now, the common misconception we're going to talk about in just a moment. Like a lot of the cardiology literature will say, well, you need to do this once or twice a day to raise it, but we'll talk about that in a minute. What really works effectively, though, is to lose weight, stop smoking. There are certain foods that will raise your HDL. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, and exercise is the best way to raise your HDL. If your HDL is low, like 0.9 or less, that's a bad risk factor. And if you obtain ideal weight, you reduce your risk by up to 55%. Here's a quiz for you. I want you to tell me true or false. Don't you need to eat some cholesterol? True or false?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Chicken and fish are healthy?
Yes.
Okay. 1 to 2 drinks a day is heart protective?
No.
Fat is bad for you?
No.
Avocados are bad due to high fat content? Nuts are worse due to higher fat content? Coconuts are the worst because high saturated fat?
No.
Margarine is good for you. They're all false. So let's talk about fat. When you look at the influence of fat on your cholesterol, it is actually a bigger determinant than actually eating cholesterol. Isn't that funny? Like if you eat saturated fat, which is found where? Yeah, and what refers to saturated or unsaturated? It's basically a chemical definition. If you look at the fatty acid chain, if each carbon has a hydrogen around it, then it's saturated. So if there's no double bonds, then it's saturated. But a layman's term for it is saturated fats at room temperature. What state are they in? Solid, right? And unsaturated fats are liquid, right? So if you have saturated fat in your diet, that raises cholesterol more than any other dietary factor. And for those of you who are health professionals, you can use what's called the Keys equation, K-E-Y-S, to predict what someone's cholesterol will be depending on what their dietary habits are. Interestingly enough, polyunsaturated fats, which are what? Name some polyunsaturated fats. Most of the nut sort of fats, safflower oil, also bean fats, soybeans, those have polyunsaturated. Most nuts are polyunsaturated, like cashews, things like that. Almonds, right? How about monos? What are monounsaturated fats? All that refers to is that polys have more than one double bond, monos have one double bond in their chain. That's all it means. Again, it's a chemical equation, but let's be practical. So what are monounsaturated fats? Avocado, olive. Those are all monounsaturated. Now the polys lower your LDL, which is the bad cholesterol, right? The monos raise your HDL, which is the good cholesterol. And of course, nuts, even though it seems like nuts are high in fat, they actually reverse heart disease. Isn't that weird? That doesn't seem to make any sense. And in fact, if you look at some of the studies on nuts specifically, a lot of them have been done in Loma Linda, California. One of the studies that I chose to share with you, the reason why I chose this is because they ate 1.5 cups of walnuts a day. That's insane. Like, that's a huge amount of walnuts. And they actually blinded the study. They gave the walnuts ground up into little pieces like powder and put it into the food, into the recipes, and gave the same recipes to the control group, but gave them different fats, not walnut fat. So it was a very well-designed study, and it was done in Loma Linda. And the amazing thing is that they lowered their LDL by 0.5 in 4 weeks. Did you know that's more powerful than a drug? 4 weeks. It's like Lipitor. That's insane. And it's just as powerful as like quitting smoking or exercising or achieving ideal weight, because this is multiplied by 2 to 3% per point of drop. So basically, it ends up being almost 50%. Have you heard of omega-3 fatty acids? Those are really good for you. Most people think that you can only get it from like fatty fish like salmon, right? But did you know you don't have to eat the cholesterol-containing salmon? You can get it from flax and some forms of seaweed. And if you have omega-3 supplementation, you are more likely to survive from your heart attack, more likely to keep your stent and your arteries open, lower your blood pressure, lower your triglycerides, and your platelets. Who knows what a platelet is? It's like when you cut yourself, when that clot forms, those are platelets. But the problem is that when you have a problem in your coronary arteries, if there is a plaque buildup, the platelets can also block off that artery.
Kind of sticky.
Exactly. You don't want your platelets to be sticky. You want them to be smooth. And so that decreases platelet aggregation if you have enough omega-3 fatty acids. How many people have heard of trans fats? They're so bad, they're illegal. Did you know that? You can't even have them in fast food restaurants anymore. It's like, it was first passed in my country in New York, and then it spread to the rest of the country. We talked about how they're formed. They're formed by, I wish I had the chalkboard now, but that's fine. Anyway, it's from plant fats, the double bond, and if you add heat, light, or oxygen, you create the cis to trans change. So what I tell people is the worst thing for you is the deep fat fryer, right? Because there's plenty of heat, light, and oxygen, and no one changes that thing. Like, it changes like once a week. It's supposed to be changed every day. And the only thing that is good for is your biodiesel car. That's it. We also find cis to transformation and also hydrogenated oils. Have you heard of that? Those are found in margarine. And this is just a limited margarine study, but they found that those who just used 4 teaspoons a day, now that's not a lot of margarine. You know, 4 teaspoons, that's like maybe 2 pieces of bread, right? A day, versus people who use margarine less than once a month, 66% increased risk for heart disease compared to those who didn't use very much. So margarine isn't necessarily protecting you from heart disease, but you can use fats. Fats aren't bad. Like if you use olive oil, right? Have you tried maybe olive oil and a little salt on your bread? That's really good. There are nice healthy spreads now. I don't know if you guys have like Earth Balance and stuff like that here in Denmark, where there's no saturated or hydrogenated fats in it. Maybe there's more of that here than maybe in third world countries. I know that that's becoming more popular in my country. This is an interesting study where each of the subjects took 4 pills a day, but the pills were a food. And so this was an 8-month study, and an interesting concept was that they dropped their cholesterol from 7.8 to 6.1. They dropped their LDL by 11% and raised their HDL by 11%. So again, the same parameters as a cholesterol medication. Very, very powerful. Anyone know what the 4 white pills were that they took a day? They were about the size of a pill, and they were white. They were raw. Yes, they were garlic. Who said that? They were garlic. Isn't that funny? That just a food could actually help you. The problem with this study is when they analyzed the data halfway through, all the parameters were worse before they got better. And a lot of people say, well, wait a minute, I don't understand why if I'm exercising, I've become vegan, I'm drinking water, I'm eating my garlic, I'm eating the nuts, I'm eating all this stuff, and now my cholesterol went up. And do you understand how that works? What happens is your cholesterol, you're trying to get it from the walls of the artery out of the body. Does that make sense? That's your goal. If you're slowly occluding or blocking off your coronary arteries, you want to take the plaque from that and get it out in as rapid a fashion as possible. But here's how that works. The HDL cholesterol, as it rises, it begins to harvest the cholesterol from the arteries. And that HDL will carry it to places like the gallbladder, the bile salts, because you need cholesterol to create the bile salts. And then when you secrete the bile salts into your intestinal tract to digest fats, right? If you eat soluble fiber, it binds to the bile salts and now it takes it out of your body. So that's the quick pathway of how to remove cholesterol. There's also another way to remove cholesterol. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But the problem is that the HDL cholesterol has to take it from the wall and first bring it into solution. Does that make sense? So your cholesterol may go up even when you do lifestyle changes initially. But once it's in solution, then it can be processed and removed from the body. We talked about soluble fiber. Yesterday we talked about insoluble fiber, and all that refers to is the soluble fiber dissolves in water, insoluble fiber does not. The soluble fiber is found where? Where do you find soluble fiber? Anyone? Fruit and? Nuts, yeah. Fruits, nuts, vegetables, beans. Also, which particular grain? Does anyone know? This one is half insoluble and half soluble. There's a big box that says Cheerios reduce heart disease. Have you ever seen that? But it's not Cheerios. It's because Cheerios are made of oats, right? And oats have soluble fiber. That's why when you cook your oats, they're kind of slimy. That's the soluble fiber, right? The kind of chewy part of it, that's the insoluble fiber. Then both of them are necessary. If you have insoluble fiber, that allows, right, the food to go through you quicker. It decreases your transit time. And that's important to reduce your risk for colon cancer. But the dissolvable fiber, the soluble fiber, is actually what removes cholesterol from your body. But if you don't eat enough of it, if you don't eat enough soluble fiber, the bile salts that contain the cholesterol, they go through your intestine and then they're reabsorbed in the terminal ileum. And that's not what you want, right? You want to get rid of the cholesterol because you don't need to eat cholesterol. Your body will make it on its own. Did you know that? You don't have to eat cholesterol. Your body will make more than enough, right? If you eat only plant foods, you're not eating any cholesterol. Did you know that? But it will take the fat and it will synthesize cholesterol because do you need cholesterol at all? Yes, you do. If you don't have cholesterol, you cannot make testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. All of your steroid hormones come from cholesterol as their precursor. They have a benzene ring in them, and there's a very common sort of structure between all of them. Your cholesterol can be too low. In some forms of cancer, especially like liver cancer, your cholesterol is too low, and how you figure that out, like a guy will say, you know, I don't get my morning erections anymore. You may want to check him for his cholesterol and his cancer. Now, that's important, right? I mean, you're not going to die, but it's quality of life, right? Your wife is not going to be happy if that happens. So when you think about the sun, that's actually another way to lower your cholesterol. Not a big way, but I think it's pretty cool because when you are exposed to the sunlight, which we were today, we were outside, it was a beautiful day, right? It actually takes a molecule that is derived from cholesterol and turns it into vitamin D. Now, that's a long process. It goes into your bloodstream, into your kidneys, all this other stuff, but ultimately it makes vitamin D. And that is very important, not just for heart disease, but for cancer. And as I've mentioned, even infectious disease. There are studies that show now that your risk of dying from pneumonia is higher even with a low normal vitamin D level versus a high normal vitamin D level. And the freshest literature having to do with the sun and heart disease is just out. For many, many years, they have been noticing a spike in heart attacks in the spring and in the fall of the year. Now, this is literature from my country. They looked at this and they tried to figure out why there were these two little blips in heart attacks. They would just really go up high. And then they noticed that it was not present in Arizona. And it was not present in like part of Indiana. Any guesses as to what it was related to? Yes, it's the circadian rhythm. What happens in the spring and the fall in many countries and in my country is that they change the time, don't they? They change the time an hour. I don't know if they do that here in Denmark, but let me tell you right now, it's really bad for you. It's so bad for you that it increases your risk of heart attack during that period of time. I mean, who would have thought that, you know, the cycle of the sun was so important even for your heart? I mean, that doesn't even seem to make sense, but it's true. Have you noticed you feel bad for weeks after the time change? It's not just that day, right? You don't recover quickly unless, I don't know, maybe you guys recover real quickly, you're strong, tough, or whatever. But it actually affects you. It suppresses your immune system. That's been known for a long time. But recently they've just discovered that it increases your risk for heart attack during those times of change. If you want to look at reduction of risk in heart disease, just eating more fiber in general. 15 grams more fiber equals drop your cholesterol by 15%. It's basically a 1-to-1 ratio. And we mentioned what things are high in fiber: whole grains, right? Beans, nuts, certain types of fruits are very high in fiber. Vegetables, yes?
I'm wondering about this number, 15 grams. How many peoples is that?
Well, if you look at like a generous sized apple, like a big apple, that would be like 3 or 4 apples. Yeah. So if you did the apple diet that I talked to you guys about yesterday, where you ate a big apple before your meal, you would add your 15 grams of fiber. That'd be fantastic. We talked about that plant foods have fiber, and we also talked about that animal products, right? How much fiber does chicken have?
No.
0. Eggs,
No.
butter,
No.
cheese,
No.
milk.
No.
Yeah, no, there's no fat in animal products. Now, there is some, there's no fiber, pardon me. There's lots of fat in animal products, unless you get totally lean chicken breast or something like that. But you're still getting cholesterol, even if you do that. So if you think about fiber, when you look at certain grains, right, when they refine them, they take away what?
Fiber.
The fiber. You know what's funny about refined grains? Is when you go to the white bread section, it says enriched. What if I reached into your pocket and I took out $20? And then I reached into my pocket and gave you back 4. And I said, you're enriched. Would you feel enriched? You'd feel like I just robbed you, right? You took $16. But did you know that's what they do to grains, to wheat, corn, rice, right? They take out 20 vitamins and minerals and they only put back 4. Did you know that? It's robbery, I tell you, highway robbery, right? So I don't like white rice, white bread, white pasta. I like white people, but not white grains, right? Those are really bad. I like brown people and purple people and yellow people too. I mean, so, what?
Ginger Pinkerton.
Yeah, ginger Pinkerton? Yeah, any color, that's fine. So I mentioned the full plate diet, which is a very simple diet. Does anyone remember the only rule of the full plate diet? All you have to do is eat 40 grams of fiber a day. That's it. And how do you know how much fiber? You read the label. Or you can even just say how much fiber in a apple, banana, or whatever. You can type it up. And there's little books you can carry around with you. But it's more than just food, right? It's more than just exercise. In fact, I believe that 9 out of 10 illnesses start here, in the mind, in the brain. And when you look at different personality types, I'm looking for somebody, but I don't see them. No. They deny that they're type A. But anyway, long story short, the type A personality is, for many years, has been implicated in an increased death rate, and specifically from fatal heart attacks. Now, when you look a little bit more closely at the type A personality, it's not all of their personality traits. So name some personality traits of the type A personality. What are they like? Outgoing, yeah. What else?
Rambunctious.
Well, maybe driven, ambitious, controlling, right? Punctual, like on time, right? Organized. So they looked at all those traits, and can you guess which traits of the type A person, I didn't name them all, but which 2 traits were actually related to death? Does anyone know? Take a guess. There's no wrong answer. It's okay.
Controlling.
No, actually that wasn't it, but that's not nice to be controlling.
Stress.
No, stress is not good, but that wasn't one of them either. Number 1 was hostility. Right? Hostility. It's one thing for you to be driven or ambitious, but what about if your lab partner is not? All right? That's not good for you.
Anger.
Yeah, exactly. Hostility. That's bad. The other one was intolerance. So it's one thing for you to be on time, but what about if the person who's supposed to help you out is late? Right? If you're intolerant of them, that's bad for you. In fact, if you just lose your cool for 1 second, your risk of fatal heart attack goes up 300% for the next several hours, even if it's just for 1 second, because it's not good for you. God did not design us for anger, for hostility, for intolerance, for sadness, right? For guilt, for things that are negative, right? He designed us for love, for joy, peace, humility, grace, integrity, right? Positive emotions, not negative emotions. And I'm going to share a very interesting way to combat this, because some people say, well, I can't help it, right? I can't help it. I'm going to lose my cool or get stressed or whatever, and I can't stop that. Of course, by God's grace, you can stop that, number 1. But what they found is that the increased risk of heart attack and death is actually due to stress hormones. Hormones like epinephrine, norepinephrine, but you don't have to remember, it's like adrenaline. Maybe you've heard of that. That's just a general layman's terms for it. But the interesting thing is when you exercise, your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, your breathing goes up, and what causes those things to go up is the adrenaline. Did you know that? The epinephrine, the norepinephrine, those aren't bad hormones in the right context. So when you start to exercise, right, those hormones increase the blood flow to your muscle beds. They dilate your capillaries, right? They increase all of those parameters. And they do that through those hormones. However, when you exercise, your body simultaneously secretes the enzyme to break all those hormones down. Did you know that? In fact, the neat thing is that the half-life of the enzyme is much, much longer than the stress hormone. So the neat thing is that when you exercise in the morning, right, you do your daily jog around the lake or whatever, right? You produce the epinephrine, norepinephrine, but it gets broken down pretty much as soon as you're done. But the enzyme is still flowing through your veins. If you want to know what it is, it's catechol-O-methyltransferase, but you don't need to know that. You probably need to know that, but most of us don't need to know that. But catechol-O-methyltransferase has a very long half-life relative to the stress hormones. So when you're done with your jog, right, and you're off to work, and the traffic is so bad, and some guy cuts you off, and then he shows you a hand signal out the window, right? And then you're like, oh, you get stressed, and then the adrenaline comes out, but the enzyme breaks it down. And the traffic was so bad, you get to work late, and your boss chews you out, and then you get stressed, but the enzyme breaks it all down. Isn't that cool? I think that's amazing. That exercise protects you not just while you're exercising, but for the rest of the day. Phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. So there's things that you can do to protect yourself. But what I'd like to close with is that, there's lots of ways to reduce heart disease. Not just lifestyle factors. There's technology, right? There's stents, there's bypass, there's all kinds of new angioplasty techniques. There's neat things that they're coming up with all the time to save your heart. However, there comes a time when no amount of cholesterol-lowering drug will save you. No amount of stent or bypass can reverse the damage that is done. No amount of carrot juice will resuscitate you. No vegan diet, no exercise, no water. There comes a point in the cases of critical congestive heart failure and severe either ischemic heart disease or cardiomyopathy, there comes a point when you have only one hope for survival. And that is when your heart is so sick that you go on a list. And we call it the transplant list. The only hope you have is a new heart. Now, there is only one thing that those patients are hoping and praying for on that list. You know what they're hoping for? They're hoping that a donor will become available in time to save them. But do you understand that if you are on the transplant list, in order for you to live, it means someone else must die? Many people don't understand why Jesus had to die, but I do. Because you see, you have only one heart. And in order for that person to benefit from your heart, you must die. You see, Jesus was the only one of our race who is able to be the donor of his nature or of his heart. I can't take your heart because you're just sick as I am spiritually. You're just a sinner just like I am. The only one who can save us is the one who has a healthy heart. And he is the one who gives it. You see, salvation is free for you and I, just for the asking. But it is very expensive for the Son of God because it costs him his life. Consider this passage in Genesis. As the scene opens, Abraham is walking up Mount Moriah with his son Isaac. And Isaac said, Father, here is the wood, here is the fire, but where is the lamb for the sacrifice? And Abraham says something absolutely profound. He says, my son, God will provide who? Himself a lamb for the sacrifice. You see, Jesus Christ is not only the great physician, the great transplant surgeon that gives us a new heart, but he is the organ donor. I pray that you would accept that new heart tonight. How many of you would like to do that? Raise your hand. Fantastic. Beautiful. All right. Thank you very much.